This happened a couple of months ago when I decided to take a weekend off and disappear into the woods. Life had been noisy. Work, notifications, people. I craved silence, the kind that only a remote forest could provide. I found a secluded spot by a quiet lake, the kind of place where the world seemed to fold in on itself. The water was still, and the trees whispered to each other in a language only they understood. I set up my tent, unpacked my gear, and let the calm wash over me. The sun dipped behind the trees, and the sky bruised into twilight. The forest seemed to exhale as the light faded, every leaf and twig settling into the night. I built a small fire and sat by it, watching the flames eat away at the wood, sending embers into the cool air. It was probably around midnight when I first heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the underbrush just beyond the reach of the firelight. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a curious raccoon. But these steps were too heavy, too measured. I strained to listen, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The sounds would stop, and just when I thought I'd imagined it, they'd start again, always circling. I forced myself to move, to break the spell of fear rooting me to my spot. I stood up, shining my flashlight into the dark. The beam caught nothing but trees and shadows, everything swaying gently in the breeze. I felt foolish, my rational mind wrestling with the unease that crept up my spine. I decided to turn in for the night, convincing myself that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I zipped up my tent, buried myself in my sleeping bag, and tried to focus on my breathing. The forest outside was a living thing, creaking and rustling, but beneath it all, I thought I could still hear those footsteps. I didn't sleep much. Every time I drifted off, a snap of a twig or the brush of leaves would jolt me awake. At some point, I gave up, unzipped the tent, and crawled out into the damp, early morning air. The sky was gray, and the world felt raw, like it hadn't fully woken up yet. That's when I saw them, the symbols. They were carved into the bark of the trees surrounding my campsite. Jagged, crude etchings, some crossed out, others overlapping. My fingers traced the rough grooves, each one filled with dirt and decay. They weren't natural. Someone had made them, and they were fresh. My stomach twisted. I spun around, suddenly feeling exposed, as if I'd wandered into a place I wasn't meant to be. The campsite felt different now, smaller, as if the trees had closed in overnight. I began packing up, my hands clumsy and shaking. I kept expecting to hear those footsteps again, to see someone step out from behind a tree, but the forest remained still, holding its breath. The hike back to my car was brutal. The trail seemed longer, every turn unfamiliar. The quiet wasn't comforting anymore. It was suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I'd stop, listening, and the silence would rush in like water, drowning me. When I finally reached my car, I threw my gear into the back seat and locked myself inside. I sat there, engine off, staring into the trees. Nothing moved. The world was still. I started the car and drove, not looking back, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if expecting to see someone sitting in the back seat, staring back at me. It's been months, but I still dream about that place, about the footsteps and the symbols. Sometimes I wake up and think I hear them again, just outside my window, circling, waiting. I haven't been camping since. This happened a couple of months ago. I'd gotten into the habit of taking evening walks around my neighborhood. It was my way of unwinding, letting the cool air and the quiet streets work out the knots of the day. The routine was familiar. Down my street, past the little park with the rusted swing set, and through a stretch of older houses where the streetlights buzzed and cast long shadows. That night was no different. I had my hoodie zipped up, hands stuffed into my pockets, my breath fogging in front of me. The sidewalks were empty, Just the soft thud of my sneakers against the concrete and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The world felt small and safe, like nothing bad could reach me there. I turned onto Maple Avenue, the part of the walk where the houses were spaced farther apart, their yards tangled and overgrown. The streetlights here had always been a little unreliable. One in particular flickered every few seconds, casting the road in a jittery half-light. It was under that streetlight that I saw him. At first, I thought he was just another person out for a walk. He stood still, his silhouette sharp against the yellowish glow. He wore a dark jacket, the kind with deep pockets and a hood that cast his face in shadow. I kept my pace steady, my eyes forward, not wanting to seem nervous. It wasn't unusual to pass a stranger, especially in the early evening. But as I drew closer, something felt off. He wasn't moving. No phone, no earbuds, not even a cigarette. Just standing there, his shoulders rigid, his hands tucked into his jacket. My skin prickled, and my instincts nudged me to cross the street, but I didn't want to look like I was scared. That's when I saw it. The edge of a handgun, just visible beneath his jacket. The metal caught the light, a thin, cold line against the dark fabric. My mind stuttered, half of me trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was something else. Maybe I was seeing things. But my gut knew better. My breath came shallow, a tight wheeze that I couldn't control. He saw me notice. His head lifted, and his eyes met mine. Flat, unblinking, a predator's gaze. His hand shifted, the jacket parting just enough to make the weapon unmistakable. His fingers tightened around the grip, and every muscle in my body locked up. The street seemed to close in around me. The air turned thin, my ears filling with the rush of blood. I couldn't hear anything else. No cars, no wind, just the heavy drum of my pulse. I took a step back, my heels scraping against the pavement, and the sound seemed to echo, too loud, too sharp. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. When he did speak, his voice was low, the kind that doesn't need volume to be dangerous. He told me to leave. There was no room for argument in his tone, just a raw, bare threat that cut through the air like a knife. My mind was blank, empty except for the singular need to get away. I nodded, a quick, jerky movement, and took another step back. His eyes tracked me, his body still as stone. I wanted to run, but my legs felt disconnected, like I'd forgotten how they worked. Then something in me snapped. I turned and bolted, my feet slamming against the pavement. Every step a jolt of pain and panic. I could hear him behind me, not running, but moving. His footsteps deliberate, the soles of his shoes scraping against the concrete. I didn't look back. The houses blurred past, their windows dark and empty, and my lungs burned, each breath a ragged, wet gasp. I could see the end of the street, where the lights were brighter and the houses sat closer together. I aimed for it, my body moving on instinct, my mind a jumble of fear and fractured thoughts. When I reached the corner, I threw myself around it, my shoulder hitting the brick wall of a corner store. I stayed there, pressed against the cold, rough surface, my hands braced against the bricks, my whole body shaking. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts, the world around me muffled, distant. I waited. 1 minute. 2. Long enough for the adrenaline to sour in my veins, for the reality of what just happened to sink in. I peered around the corner, my eyes searching the street. It was empty. No figure, no footsteps. Just the steady hum of streetlights and the distant sound of a car passing by. I made it home eventually. I don't remember the walk back, just the way my front door felt against my back when I finally slammed it shut. I sat on the floor, my knees drawn up, my fingers numb and stiff. I didn't call the police. I couldn't even figure out what I would say. Since then, my walks have turned into short laps around my block, always in the daylight, always with my phone in my hand. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, that it was probably nothing. But every time I pass a flickering streetlight, I can feel his eyes on me, the weight of his stare, and I know it was real. It's funny, isn't it? How something as simple as a walk can turn on you. How a quiet evening can unravel into a nightmare. I used to love the calm of those empty streets, the comfort of solitude. Now, every shadow feels sharp, every stranger a threat. That night changed something in me. It's like a switch flipped, and the world hasn't looked the same since. This happened a few weeks back. I was driving through a national park, cutting through the winding roads to shave an hour off my trip. It was late afternoon, and the light was already starting to slip away, the sun barely peeking through the thick canopy of trees. I hadn't seen another car for miles, just the empty road unfurling ahead of me and the woods pressing in on either side. My back was stiff from sitting too long, so when I saw a small gravel pull-off with a faded wooden sign marking a trailhead, I decided to stop. I figured a quick walk would help shake off the road fatigue. The trail wasn't marked on my map, but it seemed well-trodden enough. I grabbed my water bottle, slipped my pocket knife into my jacket, and set off. The path was narrow, winding through dense undergrowth. The air was cool, damp, and filled with that earthy smell you only find deep in the woods. Every step crunched, my boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. I kept my breathing steady, but there was a tightness in my chest, a small nagging feeling that I couldn't quite shake. About 10 minutes in, the trail started to change. The trees grew closer together, their branches knitting overhead, casting twisted shadows. The undergrowth thickened, and the path narrowed to barely a foot wide. I had to brush aside long, wet strands of leaves and duck beneath low-hanging limbs. My breathing became more deliberate, controlled, each exhale misting in the air. And then I saw it, the ranger station. It sat just off the trail, half hidden by a curtain of vines and moss. The building was small, maybe the size of a shed, with its roof sagging and windows smashed. The wood was dark with rot, the door hanging off one hinge. My first instinct was to turn back, but something held me there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that subtle, unsettling pull you feel when you know you shouldn't do something, but can't help yourself. I moved closer, my footsteps slow and measured. My fingers tightened around the knife in my pocket, my thumb brushing over the worn metal as if that small blade could actually protect me. The air around the building was different, colder somehow. The hairs on my arms stood on end, my skin prickling with an almost electric sense of wrongness. I reached the doorway and peered inside. The interior was worse than I expected. The floor was a mess of debris, splintered wood, old papers, broken glass. An overturned chair sat in the corner, its legs twisted, as if someone had hurled it against the wall. There was a desk, drawers pulled out and emptied, their contents scattered and soaked through with rain. My breath caught when I noticed the maps. They were pinned to the wall, yellowed and curling, but what drew my attention were the markings. Red lines crisscrossed the paper, circles drawn in thick, angry strokes. Some of the circles had names scrawled next to them, but the ink had bled, the letters unreadable. And then I heard it. A sound drifted through the shattered window, a wail, soft and distant. It wasn't an animal. I know the sounds of the forest, the high-pitched scream of a fox, the hoot of an owl. This was different. It was human, low, mournful, and carrying an edge of pain that sat heavy in my gut. My breathing turned shallow. I forced my lungs to fill slowly, drawing in the damp, musty air, but it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet stayed planted. My back pressed against the splintered doorframe. The wail came again, closer. I turned, my eyes scanning the trees. Shadows seemed to shift, shapes moving just beyond the edge of vision. I reached for my knife, my fingers curling around the handle. the metal cold and grounding. I needed to leave. I moved, my steps slow, every shift of weight on the old wood sending sharp cracks into the silence. Outside, the air felt heavier, pressing against my skin. I started back the way I came, the narrow trail seeming tighter, the trees leaning in as if trying to hold me back. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder. There was nothing, but the feeling of being watched gnawed at me. My breathing became a steady rhythm, shallow inhales, sharp exhales, each one a countdown to safety. Then the woods erupted. Branches snapped somewhere behind me, the crunch of leaves, the sound of something large moving fast. I broke into a run, my boots slipping on the muddy trail. My breath came in frantic gulps, the air sharp and cold against my throat. I could hear it now, footsteps pounding, matching my own. I didn't dare look back. My focus narrowed to the trail ahead, the thin line of dirt that promised escape. My ankle twisted on a rock, pain lancing up my leg, but I didn't stop. I bit down on the inside of my cheek, the coppery taste of blood sharp against my tongue. When I saw my car through the trees, my chest tightened with a desperate, painful relief. I slammed into the driver's side door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat, my fingers slipping against the metal. The engine roared to life, and I tore out of there, gravel spitting from under my tires. I drove until the trees thinned and the first pale wash of streetlights cut through the dark. Only then did I stop, pulling over on the shoulder, my chest heaving, my hands locked around the wheel. I don't know what I heard in those woods or what chased me out of them. I haven't told anyone. Not really. Who would believe it? But sometimes, late at night, I replay the sound of that wail, the way it seemed to slip through the trees, curling into my mind. And I wonder if I'd made it out, or if a part of me is still there, lost in those woods, listening to that mournful cry, waiting to be found. This happened a couple of months ago. I've always had this weird fascination with abandoned places. There's something about the way time sits still, how the world just forgets a place existed, leaving behind nothing but peeling paint and dust. I'd been eyeing this old warehouse on the edge of town for weeks. The windows were shattered, ivy crawling up the brick, and the front gate hung open like a broken jaw. It was the kind of place that called to me, a whisper I couldn't ignore. It was late afternoon when I parked a block away and slipped through the chain-link fence. The air had that sharp autumn bite, the kind that gnaws at your skin and leaves your breath hanging in thin white clouds. I'd brought a flashlight and my old pocket knife, more of a comfort than a weapon, but it felt good to have something solid in my hand. The front door was missing, just a metal frame leading into a yawning dark. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust motes that floated like ash. The place smelled like wet concrete and rot. A sharp, metallic edge to the air that made me breathe through my mouth. I moved through the first room, my footsteps muffled by layers of grime. The floor was littered with scraps of old paper, the remains of broken machinery, and glass that crunched softly under my boots. My breathing was steady, deliberate, the only sound against the thick, stagnant quiet. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The windows on this side of the building were all boarded up, and my flashlight struggled to keep the shadows at bay. I could hear my own pulse, a low thud in my ears, but I kept going, drawn by the promise of discovery. I found a hallway, the walls covered in faded graffiti and flaking paint. I moved slowly, my shoulder brushing against the wall, my fingers trailing through the cold dust. The floor dipped here, and water had pooled in the low spots, reflecting fractured shards of light. That's when I heard it. A click. Soft, mechanical. The kind of sound that bypasses your brain and speaks directly to your gut. I froze, the flashlight wobbling in my hand, the beam jerking against the cracked tiles. My breath caught in my throat, and I swallowed, the sound too loud in the silence. A figure stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, his silhouette sharp against the dim gray light seeping through a crack in the wall. He held a handgun, the metal dull and heavy, but it caught just enough light to gleam. His other hand was steady, the gun pointed at the ground but ready. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the hard glint of his eyes, the set of his jaw. His voice came low and even, the kind of tone you don't argue with. He told me to leave. No questions, no threats, just a statement. My mind raced, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. I nodded slowly, my lips dry, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I forced myself to take a step back, then another, my boots dragging against the floor. The gun didn't move, his eyes didn't waver. My flashlight bobbed in my grip, the light bouncing off rusted metal and splintered wood. I didn't dare look away from him, not until I reached the hallway's end, where the light from outside bled in through a broken door frame. The second I hit the open air, my control snapped. I ran, my lungs burning, my breath coming in jagged, uneven bursts. I vaulted the fence, stumbled over the curb, and nearly dropped my keys as I fumbled into my car. I sat there for a minute, my hands clamped around the steering wheel, my vision swimming. I couldn't stop shaking, my pulse hammering in my throat, my mind replaying the moment over and over, the way his shadow seemed to grow, how the metal of the gun shone with a cold, indifferent light. I don't know who he was. Maybe a squatter, maybe something worse. I've thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I trespassed and found someone who actually belonged there, in that place where everything and everyone is meant to be forgotten? I haven't gone back to the warehouse, or to any other abandoned place since. I still feel that cold intensity when I close my eyes, still hear the click of the gun echoing through the empty halls. It's a reminder, sharp and unforgiving, that not all ghosts are from the past. Some of them are living, breathing, and armed. This happened not too long ago. I had this idea in my head that a solo evening hike would clear my mind. I'd always liked the woods, the way the world felt muffled beneath the canopy, the smell of damp earth, the solitude. It wasn't supposed to get dark as quickly as it did, though. The forecast had called for clear skies, but the moon was nothing more than a sliver, and the trees swallowed what little light was left. I had a flashlight, but the beam felt pitiful against the darkness. It barely cut through the fog that had begun to settle in, turning the trail ahead into a ghost of a path. My breaths were shallow, and I could hear them, quick and thin, mixing with the crunch of leaves underfoot. I tried to focus on that sound, just my own breathing, just my own footsteps. But then there were other sounds, soft, distant, whispers. They rode the wind, curling through the branches, too faint to understand, but too clear to ignore. I stopped, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and listened. The forest around me was dark and dense, every shadow a potential threat. I had a knife with me, just a small one, the kind I usually brought along for cutting rope or whittling sticks. I pulled it from my pack, my fingers tight around the worn handle. It wasn't much, but it was something. The blade caught the flashlight's glow, a sliver of silver against the dark. I forced myself to breathe deeper, but the air felt thin, cold, as if I were too high up on a mountain. I moved forward, slower now. My senses were sharp, each rustle of leaves a jolt to my system. The trail twisted and wound through the trees, and the deeper I went, the more the whispers seemed to follow. They weren't words, exactly, just sounds, like breath pushed through teeth, like the forest itself was exhaling. Then I saw them, lights, tiny flickering points like candles or old lanterns. They danced between the trees, never in the same place for long. I couldn't make out what was holding them, if anything. My flashlight couldn't reach them, the darkness swallowing its beam before it touched those lights. Panic coiled tight in my chest. I turned off my flashlight. Standing there in the pitch black, my breathing too loud, I tried to steady myself. My hands were slick with sweat, the knife handle slippery. I wiped my palm against my jeans, the fabric cold and damp. The lights moved closer. I could hear them now, the whispers no longer distant. They scraped against my mind, meaningless but insistent, like a song with no melody. I backed away, my feet stumbling over roots and rocks, each step a gamble. My breathing turned ragged, the air refusing to fill my lungs. Something moved to my left. I whipped around, the knife in front of me, my arm a trembling extension of my fear. I saw nothing, but the presence was undeniable. It pressed against me, the air thick and heavy. My breaths came in sharp, stuttering gasps, fogging in the cold. I started to run. The trail was a blur, my flashlight still off, my instincts pulling me back the way I'd come. Branches clawed at my clothes, leaves slapped against my face. The whispers rose, swelling into a chorus of soft, hungry sounds. My foot caught on something, a root, a stone, and I went down hard. The world spun, and the knife flew from my hand, skittering off into the dark. Pain flared in my ankle, hot and sharp. I scrambled to my feet, weight on one leg, and searched the ground with trembling hands. My fingers brushed dirt, leaves, and then the cold, reassuring metal of the knife. I didn't waste time. I pushed forward, every step a fresh surge of pain. My breaths were all I could hear now, raw and wet, the sound of survival. The lights were gone, but the whispers lingered, close and constant. When I finally saw the trailhead, my vision blurred with tears. My car sat where I'd left it, the only familiar thing in a world that had turned wrong. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and sat there, my chest heaving, the knife still clutched in my hand. I never did figure out what those lights were, or what had whispered to me in the woods. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think I hear it again. That soft, insistent breath against my ear, reminding me that some places aren't meant to be found. This happened a couple of months ago. I was driving late at night, one of those stretches where the highway feels like it might never end. The road was dead quiet, just the hum of my engine and the soft thump of my tires against the seams in the asphalt. I'd been driving for hours, my eyes gritty, my back knotted up from sitting too long. I needed a break, just a few minutes to stretch my legs and clear my head. I saw the rest stop sign looming out of the dark, the blue and white lettering lit by a tired old spotlight. The place didn't look like much, just a small loop off the highway with a few faded parking spots, a pair of rusted gas pumps, and a building that might have once been a convenience store or maybe just a bathroom. The neon sign over the pump sputtered, casting a sickly green light that blinked in and out like a dying heartbeat. I pulled in, the crunch of gravel under my wheels loud in the stillness. I left the engine running for a minute, my hands still on the wheel, fingers tight enough to hurt. I couldn't shake this weird feeling, like I'd just done something wrong, even though all I'd done was pull over. You ever get that? Like the world had tilted just a little, not enough to notice, but enough to make your gut twist? I killed the engine and stepped out, the cold air biting through my jacket. The wind was sharp, cutting across the empty lot, and everything smelled faintly of rust and wet concrete. I walked over to a bench that sat under the busted awning, the wood rough and splintered. I sat down, rolled my shoulders, and took a deep breath. It felt thin, hollow, like the air itself didn't want to be there. That's when I saw it. A shadow, right at the edge of the gas pumps. Just a shape, nothing solid. Tall, thin, barely more than a smudge against the night. I blinked, squinted, but the shadow didn't move, It was like it was waiting. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, maybe a tree swaying in the wind. But the more I stared, the more I realized there were no trees close enough to cast a shadow. Nothing else moved. The neon sign buzzed, flickered, and when the light cut out for just a split second, the shadow was gone. My breath hitched. I felt my pulse in my fingertips, a dull, fast thud. I sat there, every muscle tight, my mind racing through excuses. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no rustling. Just the wind, and even that had dropped to nothing. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the cool metal of my multi-tool. It wasn't much, but the blade was sharp enough. I ran my thumb over the edge, the tiny bite of steel grounding me. I moved back to my car, my footsteps too loud, echoing off the empty building. The door handle was cold, and when I pulled it, the creak was like a scream in the silence. I slipped inside, hit the lock, and just sat there, staring out the windshield. The rest stop lay empty. The gas pumps stood like rusted sentinels. The building just a dark, empty husk. I wanted to start the engine, but my hands wouldn't move. I felt pinned in place, like if I made a sound, if I even breathed too loud, something would hear me. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes maybe longer. My breath fogged the glass, and I wiped it away with the edge of my sleeve, leaving a smear that only made the shadows outside look stranger. And then I saw it again. The shadow, back by the pumps. But this time, it moved. Just a step, a shift, like it was unfolding from the darkness. It didn't walk, didn't glide. More like it melted, slipping between shapes. 1 second it was near the pumps. The next it was closer, halfway across the lot. My hands found the keys. I twisted them, the engine catching with a rough growl. The headlights snapped on, cutting through the dark. The lot was empty. The shadow was gone. I didn't wait to find out where it went. My tires spun in the gravel, the car lurching forward, headlights throwing wild arcs of light as I pulled out onto the highway. I didn't look back. My hands were glued to the wheel, my breath coming in shallow bursts, like I couldn't quite fill my lungs. It was miles before I felt normal again, before the world seemed to settle back into place. I pulled into a brightly lit truck stop, the kind with a diner and a 24-hour convenience store. I sat in the parking lot under the harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by rumbling engines and the chatter of other travelers. And only then did I start to believe that I was really safe. I still think about that night. I've tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was just a shadow, just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I know it wasn't. There was something at that rest stop. Something that watched me. Something that moved when the lights went out. And I have this feeling, this awful, nagging sense, that whatever it wasn't done with me. That's all for today, folks. If you want to see more of this creepy content, click on the video on screen.